Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this last meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee of Cambridgeshire County Council for the current calendar year. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the press and public who have joined us virtually today, rather than in person. And the County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I please ask that everyone present turns their mobile phones, it should be subjunctive, turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. We are not expecting a fire today, or indeed a test alarm, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we must all make our way downstairs and out of the main entrance. The muster point is on the green opposite the main entrance. I propose to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to the debate. However, we have a lot of business to get through today, so I would ask all members to keep their contributions concise, not least because of the length of the agenda, but also, of course, because of the conditions under which we are operating. The meeting room has been arranged to comply with public health guidance on COVID safety, and in line with the latest advice, committee members and officers are asked to remove their face coverings only when they are speaking and to wear masks for the rest of the time. Because of those COVID conditions, we have reduced the officer attendance at this meeting to the absolute minimum, but what we have lost in quantity, we certainly make up for in quality, with Assistant Director Cheryl French joining us and also Committee Officer Dawn Cave. The other officers will be beaming in from the remote spiral arm of the galaxy or wherever they happen to be during the course of the meeting. So can I start by asking for apologies for absence, please?
Chair, we have apologies from councillors Tierney, Gowing and Goldsack, and we have Councillor Hay substituting for Councillor Gowing.
Thank you very much indeed. And does Councillor Hay?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like it put on record that I am asthmatic and wearing a mask for any length of time affects my breathing, so I may have to take it off from time to time.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hay, and thank you also for drawing that to my attention before the start of the meeting. That's appreciated, and I'm sure we will understand. So would any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any of the items on the agenda, please? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much. So we then move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 16th of November, and we're being asked to approve those as an accurate record. If any committee member wishes to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes, can they please do so now? I'm seeing none, so we will take that as carried unanimously. So on that basis, are committee members happy to approve the minutes as written? Again, any objections, raise your hand, otherwise I'll take that as assent. Thank you. The action log is next, and an updated action log was included in the published papers for this meeting. Are there any questions on this, or can we take that as noted? Noted. Thank you very much. We've not received any petitions or public questions, which is the third item. So we're now into the main body of the meeting, and I'd like to ask people, I don't wish to stifle debate or curtail democracy or anything like that, but bearing in mind the conditions we are operating under, I'd be grateful if people could keep their contributions concise. Thank you. So the next item is Babraham Smart Energy Grid Updated Investment Case. And I believe, should we have Claire Julian Smith for this item? Claire and Matthew. So Claire Julian Smith and Matthew Rathbone. So I'll ask Claire to present the report to us, please.
Yes, thank you. So the investment case for this project was approved by Environment and Sustainability Committee back in March of this year. The committee delegated the final decision to enter into a works contract with Weeks once the final costs were confirmed, to a small group of senior officers and members, as has been the case with previous energy projects. The costs have now been received, and capital costs have substantially increased, which has obviously triggered the need to come back to committee for a decision on the revised investment case and increased borrowing, which is captured in the paper. This project, amongst others, has been impacted by the significant volatility in the markets and supply chains, which have caused cost to increase. And it should be noted, though, that as well as cost rises, electricity prices have also risen considerably, which has had a positive effect on the overall business case compared to the figures that were presented back in March. So the paper also details the work that's been done on the project since then. So most notably, the private or direct wire has been installed with the final connections to be made as part of the next package of works, which is to deliver the infrastructure at the Park and Ride site itself. In addition, the team is in the process of finalising the power purchase agreement, the PPA, and the PPA will enable the council to sell electricity to the Cambridge University Hospitals Trust, and also enable us to import power to the site by the solar. The report is, whilst the costs have increased significantly, that there are still risks with in terms of the overall business case more generally. So opportunities that the delivery of this portion of works provides for the future. So, for example, EV charging infrastructure and battery storage. So just ahead of the discussion, could I please ask Matthew if you've got anything you'd like to add to what I've just said?
No, that's fine, Claire. The main point I think you already mentioned was that energy prices have risen very sharply. We've only incorporated that change to a relatively minor extent in the report, because the volatility of pricing means that we cannot assume that the high prices that have been seen over the last few months will continue in future years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire and Matthew. I'm going to start by asking for questions. Does any member have any questions for either Claire or Matthew on this item? Councillor Milnes.
Thank you. I'm going to welcome the report generally, but perhaps if I ask questions first, and then perhaps as local member I can speak as well, Chair.
And to come to that shortly after the questions.
Thank you.
Chair, my indication was to ask Councillor Milnes if he would speak up.
Ah, right. Okay, thank you.
And I'll take my mask off while I ask the questions. Thank you. Just give me a second while I find my... So I had a question about the prices quoted in the report, and I've had a note back from Matthew. So the prices refer to 55 to in paragraph 3.2 up to 200 pence per kilowatt hour, but actually this is megawatts, and therefore the price per kilowatt hour is a tenth of what is quoted. So that's something of a relief. The other question really was primarily around what learnings we gained from the St Ives project, which was further forward than this, and how that's been put into this this project as a second of a similar nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Milnes. Claire, Matthew, two questions there, one about the pricing and one about learnings from St Ives.
Shall I which way do you want to do it, Matthew? Do you want to take the
I'll
pricing first?
I'll do the pricing first. That's, in one sense, that's the easy one because that's just a mistake by me. So as Councillor Mills said, the prices that are charged on the wholesale market are usually quoted in pounds per megawatt hour, and I converted those to pence per kilowatt hour rather than pounds per megawatt hour for the purposes of the report. But when you do that, you need to change the decimal point, which I didn't do. So rather than saying 55 pence, it should be 5.5 pence. And rather than 200 pence, it should be 20 pence. Just to point out, those are wholesale prices. So the amount that the county council pays, for instance, would be, say, 16 pence, that sort of amount. That's the retail price, which is why it's higher than the 5.5. So if you're comparing the figures, the point that was trying to be made in the report is that the base assumption included for price is the 5.5, but the current market price is nearer 20. So the current market price is a lot higher, and implicitly, therefore, we're assuming that those market prices will come back down to the sorts of levels seen in January this year, rather than continue at the very high levels that we've seen in recent months.
Chair, can I ask a second question about the pricing related to the PPA? Thank you. Matthew, while you're explaining that, is the PPA where there's a bidirectional market effectively for electricity, isn't there?
Yeah.
And is this going to be done on a sort of bartering system? In other words, at the end of a period, will the balance of what we took versus what we have given be taken into account, or will Cambridge University Trust sell it at one rate and we'll sell it at a different rate?
Yes, it will be two different rates. So what we're doing is we are replicating their own system for charging. So if you been to the hospital, there are a number of independent providers within the hospital, like the shops, for instance, and the CUHT, the Cambridgeshire University Hospital Trust. They sell electricity to those shops, which is effectively selling at cost. So each month they work out what cost their electricity is from E.ON, their charge, and the cost per kilowatt hour, and that's what they charge the shops. In the same way, they'll charge that same figure to us. That includes an element for the sharing out of the fixed costs. So the greater the amount of electricity they use, the greater spread there is of those fixed costs over each kilowatt hour. However, when we're selling to them, the price is again modelled on that same figure, their current price from E.ON, but the fixed costs they pay to E.ON aren't affected by selling to us, and therefore the charge is only based on the variable element of the cost. It's actually 95% of the variable element of the cost. So one advantage of doing it like that is that even if we're going 10, 15 years into the future, there's never any danger that the hospital say, oh, because of the movements in prices, we're now losing money on this contract and we want to stop doing it. So we've deliberately modelled it in such a way that they'll always get a small benefit from taking energy from us rather than from E.ON.
Thank you. Thank you. And the other question was about the St Ives Learnings.
Yeah. So both the Babraham and the St Ives projects are still in the pre-construction phase. I'd say that there's been lessons applied from St Ives. They are sort of fractionally ahead in terms of having got into contract already. So in terms of contract development, procurement, and also some design lessons. So one example would be the level of information regarding the construction of the car parking areas has been limited in terms of its makeup. So in response to that issue having been identified on St Ives and to minimise the level of risk going forward into the Bayborough project, further ground surveys have been commissioned ahead of construction, for which costs are included in the business case.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any other questions? Councillor Gardiner first and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just with regard to the EV chargers, are they fast chargers, and how are we going to cater or stop the actual charging points being sort of blocked if somebody's gone to park and ride and is parking there all day and is using those points to charge their vehicles? So, you know, so that we can get a turnover of vehicles being able to use those charging points. That was just a thought in my mind going forward, is how we're going to actually make those charging points available to people throughout the day, rather than just being for one car for the whole day while they've gone into Cambridge.
Claire?
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern. I mean, I think that's something that we'll have to consider as we move forward in terms of exactly how that's managed. We are increasing the number of, or the business case is based on an increase in the number of charge points every 3 years. So, you know, we will look to have increased availability, which again should help with that issue.
Okay.
Chair, can I?
Sorry. Right, look, one at a time. Cheryl.
It's just to say that the Babraham and St Ives both starting off slow chargers, accepting that generally people are on a journey for 4 hours, and so most of them are slow chargers. If we move to put in fast chargers, then we'd have to have a management regime around it, as Claire said.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Milnes, Councillor Smith did indicate, were you wanting urgently to follow up on this point?
I just wanted to mention the fact that the park and rides are within the civilian parking enforcement scheme encompassed by the city, and therefore it's perfectly possible for us to ask our operators to monitor those placing and restrict the amount of time that people are allowed to park on those charging point slots.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Mine's sort of a few questions about the actual recommendations. Do you want me to ask them now or later?
If they are questions to the officers, then now is a good time.
I'll ask them later. It's just before you take the recommendations, because it's more to you, really. Not being nasty, you know.
No, I wouldn't have imagined that possible. No, but if it's not a question to the officer, then not now. Thank you. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. On the point that Councillor Milnes made, I would have thought a management on the basis of charge.
Question to the officers.
Yes.
Right.
On the basis of what Councillor Milnes has said, would it not be possible for officers to consider, and I know Cheryl French mentioned a management process, but surely management on price is the one that would bite. And if fast chargers are more expensive and slow chargers are less expensive, then people are more likely to want to leave their car, you know, in a slow space that's reasonable for them to be in for the amount of time that they expect to be in town. That's the question I was asking. You know, is that the way we'll manage it, on price? Rental for the space?
I will ask Cheryl to answer this, but I think we're straying outside the content of the report itself into rather more speculative issues. But Cheryl.
Yes, so EV chargers have software packages for delivering the charging for customers. And within that, you can program that to say that you can only stay on it for an hour and a half, otherwise you get a fine. So it's a huge incentive for people to move.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions to officers, so I will now move to ask Councillor Milnes, as one of the 4 local members, whether he wishes to comment in his role as a local member. There are 4 local members associated with this site, and they have, I think, delegated their their right to speak to Councillor Milnes to represent them all. So heavy responsibility, Councillor Milnes.
So I shall try and leave anything that might be contentious aside. And in fact, I just want to welcome the report. Clearly disappointment that the costs have escalated so much, but that's exactly in common with everything else that is going on at the moment anywhere near construction. As we're probably all aware, the supply chain costs are just spiraling, which is a huge disappointment because obviously it impacts the business case that may have some relief in the price of the electricity that we're selling, but that is hopefully likely to be temporary, whereas the costs will have to be amortized over the period of the development. However, I think we should welcome this as a major contribution and a very visible contribution to our Green to the Core policies. And so I welcome that. The other thing I'd like to just mention briefly is I'm delighted that we managed to get a situation where we buried the cable, we replaced the gas main, and the GCP replaced their cycle and footpath at the same time, which, as many people will know, is an unusual occurrence. So thank you for arranging that.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Milnes. I'm now going to move on to the debate. And so in order to enable that to proceed, I'm going to move the recommendations from the chair, which are to note progress with the project, approve the investment case, recommend the additional prudential borrowing of £1.2 million to Strategy and Resources Committee, approve a letter of intent to place orders for materials and equipment, and approve entering into a construction contract with Bouygues for the delivery of the scheme. So I formally move that, and I'd like to ask my Vice Chair to second. Councillor Gay? Yeah, second. Thank you very much indeed. So proceed to the debate then and look for speakers, please. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Basically, on the recommendations, also going back to points that's been made, D, how can we secure the costs? Because costs are escalating. Are we able to secure them? That was one question. And also, does D&E sort of depend on C, like Strategy and Resources having to agree to the borrowing of the 1.2 million? And also, my last one, will there be monitoring of the contract? And if the prices do escalate so much, will this come back to this committee at any point for us to monitor, keep an eye on, just work in progress? They were my points.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Smith. I hope I can turn to Cheryl to give us a bit of an explanation about how the process works. As you can imagine, like so many other schemes, we are caught in spiraling costs, and therefore we are having to move perhaps in order to do things slightly earlier or in a different way than we would have done had we not been having to secure costs at the point at which we're going to need to do so in order to avoid them escalating.
I can understand all that. And it's also, how long will this all be secured for? It's mainly the monitoring that I'm more concerned about.
Yeah, I can assure you these are all monitored, and this scheme, like all the other energy schemes, comes through the Green Investment and Advisory Group regularly. So in between these meetings, there are processes for member engagement and member updates on this process, and officers are working very hard to bring this in good order. So if I ask Cheryl to give a brief explanation of how CD and E fit together.
So we've received the investment grade proposal from Bouygues, which was the costs of the scheme. And as to get that investment grade proposal together, they have to go to procurement to their subcontractors. So subcontractors are asked to hold their price for a certain point for us to be able to make decisions. The reason we've got to take that letter of intent forward is because we can only secure prices to the end of December. If not, we would then have to go in and a second procurement to try and get a price for equipment. So that's why we're keen to get recommendation D through the process. Your next question was around the prudential borrowing and the 1.2 million. So that 1.2 million will be going into the next business planning process. So during next year, because that the finance won't be required until next year. So we can proceed into contract if you agree the investment case, and the borrowing will go through the system through the next business planning cycle. Was that it?
That was it. The monitoring's being sorted out. Thank you. I just sort of thought we needed the 1.2 now, but we're agreeing to secure prices. So I was just getting a bit mixed up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Any other contributions to the debate? I'm not seeing any, which suggests that there, I hope, is a degree of assent to these recommendations. This is yet another excellent and important scheme for helping us decarbonise across our own estate and across Cambridgeshire as a whole. So I'm very pleased indeed to see this on the agenda today and to see it progressing. Can I see those in favour then of the recommendations? That I think is unanimous. So thank you all very much indeed, members, for that. We then move on to the next paper, which is the Environment Fund and Resourcing Low Carbon Delivery. So once again, if I can turn to Cheryl French, Assistant Director of Climate Change and Energy Services, to present this report to us.
Yes, and I've also got hopefully someone coming on Zoom. Emily Bolton is going to be coming on Zoom as well, I understand, at some stage, because Emily was putting forward the additional £15,000 for the grid connection. So this report is about requesting drawdown from the Environment Fund, which was approved back in February 2020. So it's what we can spend that money against. And we're proposing here that this is capital funding to deliver capital projects to reduce carbon emissions and energy reductions, or to bring forward renewable energy. And what we're looking for is additional capacities and skills to work on capital projects to reduce carbon emissions. Paragraph 2.3 describes the current pipeline that we have here at County Council. It's over £100 million, and that includes 60 projects which we have already constructed with schools, more school projects to come, plus investment that's currently going into construction on projects like Swaffham Prior, North Angle Solar Farm, Babraham Park and Ride, St Ives. And we have some projects that we're working to bring forward in the next couple of years as a large energy projects, and that's part of the pipeline. So we've looked at our skills and capacities, and we think that there are some additional skill sets that would benefit projects. Skill sets which include construction skills, further energy market skills, so commercial skills out in the market, additional contract management skills, so picking up that point that Councillor Smith just made, to be able to manage and get the full benefits, the commercial benefits out of schemes. So paragraph 2.4 is setting down what that looks like in terms of funding over 4 years. And the other thing I just wanted to note is that the team works very heavily on trying to attract public sector funding. So we try to draw down as much finance from the government through grant regimes or competitions to be able to offset some of the costs. And I just wanted to note that last year we drew down £6 million on public sector decarbonisation funding. So I think the proposal is to also be able to draw down more projects and more funding like that. The second part of the report is around a Cambridge EV charge point project, which is a collaboration that Emily has been doing with Cambridge City Council. And from the report, you can see that there's been significant funding and benefits drawn down, but we have a £15,000 funding gap on the electricity connections for the EV chargers. And so the report is looking to draw down funding both for capacity and skills and grid connection costs.
Thank you very much indeed, Cheryl. Emily, was there anything you felt you wanted to or needed to add to what Cheryl has said about your scheme?
No, I think Cheryl's covered it. Thank you.
you very much indeed, Emily. So do members have any questions for Cheryl or Emily on either of these issues in the report? Councillor Milnes, Councillor Smith, you indicating? Yes. And then Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to understand the 50% profit share agreement with BP Chargemaster and understand where the role of the city and county is in funding the project in terms of its capital cost and what BP Chargemaster are adding to that in order for them to get their 50% of the profit share while it's operating. And also, obviously, this is very much a city-based project, and whether we've got any intention or aspiration to extend this in other places in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milnes. Is that an Emily question? Emily?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the two local authority roles, City Council has been providing the bulk of the match funding that was required to leverage the grants that we're receiving. And we're now putting forward, hopefully, should you agree, this £15,000 to plug the gap in the connection costs. In terms of BP's role, they have both providing us 4 free rapid charge points across the 2 areas. And they will also be doing all of the operations and maintenance for the duration of the contract. Now, the only revenue they get from that is their 50% profit share. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Basically, on recommendation, I'm sure the answer is going to be no, but I do have to ask it. Sorry. Recommendation A, additional staff resources totaling 570,000. I'm assuming that doesn't mean to say that we'll be employing so many people that there isn't the money to do the jobs on the ground.
No.
I had to ask, I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah. This is about trying to get enough staff to deliver the projects and to ensure we get the benefits out of them. So as an example, we just had Babraham Park and Ride. We've now been approached by the CPCA, the Combined Authority, around their bus project and putting in additional bus charges to support that. And we're also being approached about putting taxi charges in. So it's about the capacity to do those additional commercial benefits, but it's also about just the capacity to manage some quite complex projects.
Thank you. I just didn't want to hear, you know, we haven't got the money to do the job. Thank you.
Indeed, far from it. The very small team we have does an amazing amount of work and actually leverages in huge amounts of money to make these schemes not only cover their cost, but bring income into the council over the long term. So that's good news. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask, I remember when we had early briefings about this, Cheryl advised us that one of the things we were needing to overcome was the first connector costs, which were extremely, they were very, you know, they were millions. And it was partly because of that first connector cost that we had some problems, or we were having to plan very carefully investments going forward and projects going forward. I just wondered if we are, how that is impacting on our projects now, and if how we're managing that, and if we're being impacted by it.
Yes, I mean, grid connections continue to be a significant cost if you're the one that comes forward at the time that an upgrade is required. So it's an ongoing problem. I think one of the benefits here from the work that Emily has done with Cambridge City Council is that UK Power Networks were running a competition to have investment into local upgrades to facilitate EV charging infrastructure. And I think managed to draw down some upgrades locally in Cambridge City. Is that right, Emily?
Yes, that's correct, Cheryl.
Yeah. But no, the problem is ongoing.
Thank you. Councillor Milnes, you wanted to come back with a further question.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I've now got two questions. Just in relation to the supply from UK Power Networks, so the GCP, we've been considering funding 2 additional substations so that we can get the power that we require in the area. So I wonder whether there's a relationship between this and that process. I didn't actually get an answer to the question about ambition, aspiration, or otherwise of beyond the city for a similar project, and whether that's feasible to the city project. So whether extending from a city project. And then the other thing that we spoke about briefly were when we were talking about St Ives was the electric bus charging and how that might impact on the availability of electricity supply at the park and ride, because I believe that the government funding that we're getting to supply electric vehicles is primarily aimed at the park and ride services. So there's three parts to that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So between you, Cheryl, Emily.
Emily, do you want to quickly answer the one around the EV charging, which was with a replication outside of the city? And then I'll take the other two.
Yes, of course. I think this project's given us an opportunity to do a lot of learning to understand, well, everything about how to do EV charging, particularly on street realm. I think it's fair to say we definitely have aspirations to do projects more widely, but there is nothing firmly planned at the moment. There's a lot of strategic movement in the area as well. So we've got the Combined Authority are bringing forward their local transport and connectivity plan early next year, and that has a specific piece that's looking at alternative fuels and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So once we've seen how that looks and those sorts of plans, we can then start figuring out in a bit more detail what we can do more widely.
And I'll pick up the Greater Cambridge Partnership investment into substations. So I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I commissioned a report which was with UK Power Networks and for GCP to identify what was the additional capacity requirement to decarbonise. So not only to bring forward the new homes and new transport systems, but also to retrofit homes and to electrify the transport systems. And as a result of that, we saw that there was going to be a tripling in demand, even if you are going through significant energy efficiency. And so to manage the tripling of demand and to manage the issue that Councillor Bradnam raised, which was the first connector pays the significant cost, it was about how do you manage those costs so that they don't prevent development coming forward? Because large developers might be able to afford a £2 million upgrade. But if you're a small developer or you've got a small project like EV charging that we've experienced, if you've got a project of 7 chargers and you've got a £2 million upgrade, you can't do it. So it's then about how does that bring some proportional costs into the process. So I'm a big advocate of the work that Greater Cambridge Partnership are doing there. Then I think the next question was around the bus charging. So we're currently just modelling at Bayburn Park and Ride what that looks like to have 2 150 kilowatt chargers come into our smart energy grid and how that plays out. And when I get all the detailed modelling from Bouygues, I'm happy to share it or do a little workshop with people. But the big challenge is that we know we could probably manage 1. It's whether you could manage 2 at the same time, which would be a very significant load quickly. So we'll let you know where we've got to with our modelling and how we might be able to rework some of the infrastructure on it.
And sorry, just a very brief follow-on to that comprehensive answer. Presumably, if we're anticipating that, then we can structure the infrastructure to make sure that that can be done irrespective of whether we can afford it now or later.
Yes, I mean, it was interesting. We wanted to do that with St Ives. Initially, we were wanting to put in interval charging, and actually we want to do it with Babraham. The problem is we've always wanted to do it slightly ahead of when organisations have been ready. And so you have to design to a certain standard. And then this is a bit retrofitting, but we can manage it. We've anticipated that it would come along.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. So coming back to the point, and thank you very much, Cheryl, for your answer. And well done you for remembering that way back. It seems a long time we were first talking about capacity. But I wondered if there's any movement on if we can put any pressure on to change that first connector impact, because obviously everybody all around the country is going to be experiencing this. Every small developer who might, you can just see it. If we wanted to put in small new edge of village developments, they might suddenly be that new connector, and clearly that doesn't make sense. So I just wondered, is there any pressure that we can put on the central government to encourage, because I remember you were talking about a project where you could be the first connector, but you could hold those charges and then divvy them up against the people who then used that connection at the time when they did, so that all the costs didn't fall to the first connector. So I wondered if there was any progress, and I'm sure that's what you're perhaps trying to do. But the other thing was, can we put any pressure on the government to persuade UK power networks to accept that as a reasonable way of going about things, or something better that makes it easier? Sorry, it's not very coherent, but you can understand the gist.
So regarding this issue of the first, let's say, person that comes along wanting to connect, it's a regulatory issue. So it's with Ofgem, so the regulator who looks after how we manage our connections and manages UK power networks work. So UK Power Networks are going through a new business plan process, and within that there has been some flexibility on how you can put infrastructure up front into areas that you think are going to come forward. The big issue that the regulator is trying to avoid is putting infrastructure up front and then development not coming forward, because then you've got a cost which you may not have needed to have. So it is quite complex on how they're trying to manage that. But certainly there's discussions on how to invest up front if in local plans there's a clear direction of where projects would come forward. The second thing is that the GCP project is about just trying to manage that exact issue. It's about, we put in the investment and then we'll help and facilitate the developments to connect. The third thing, UK Power Networks have been doing quite a lot of innovation. So there's something called plug and play, which we have in Cambridgeshire. So this is where projects are connected to the grid, but they are curtailed if there is instability on the grid, which means that if you're generating electricity and there's a challenge, they can stop you exporting. Now, it means that you don't have a big upfront cost to prevent your project going ahead, but it can impact your business case because you're not quite sure how much revenue could be lost through curtailment. So there's a lot of work in this space. There's a lot of lobbying for government. I mean, I think everybody understands the challenges. It's just how and what we can do to make change come forward.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'll move now to the debate, and the debate is on the following recommendations: to approve drawdown of approved capital environment funding to support additional staff resources totaling £570,000 over 4 years to deliver low carbon energy capital projects, and grid connection costs of up to £15,000 for the Cambridge EV charge point project. So I'm proposing that and looking to the Vice Chair to second. Thank you. So I'll throw that open for debate now. Is there anybody who wishes to make any comments or observations on those recommendations before we go to a vote? Not seeing anybody, so I'm going to assume that members are content. We've spent a lot of time discussing the £15,000 for the EV charge points and less about the £570,000 for staffing over 4 years, but I'm really excited about that proposal because that really does enable us to significantly increase the activity that we're doing, the determination to address climate change and energy across Cambridgeshire. That's a really exciting opportunity to increase our skills base within the organisation and to take on more, bring in more government grant funding as well as commercial income. So that's terrific news, and I'm really pleased indeed to be proposing that today. So can I see those in favour, please, of that proposal? And that again is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So the next item is the review of the climate change and environment strategy. And so once again, we have Cheryl French, who will be supported, I believe, again by Emily and also by Rebecca Gipp on remote. So just check that we've got those two officers coming in. But in the meantime, we've got Emily back again.
Got Emily, and see if Rebecca's coming. She might come in.
Can't see Rebecca yet, but perhaps Cheryl, if you would like to start us off on this.
So I'm very pleased to be presenting the review of the climate change and environment strategy to you today for comment and recommendation for full council so that it gets adopted as corporate policy. The draft strategy and documents that you've got in front of you comprises 3 parts. It's appendices 1, 2, and 3, and together they make the strategy. So the first appendix, which is a high-level strategy document, it summarises our approach to the climate and biodiversity crisis and really is aimed at businesses, partners, and communities in a simple message as possible. The document has had the benefit of working with our Business Intelligence Directorate, where we've been using insights, behavioural insights, and the skill sets from Rebecca Gipp on corporate policy to try and come up with something which would be attractive to the community to read. So we're very pleased to be presenting that. The second part of the strategy is a technical report, and this is containing the more detailed information, and it's more targeted at those who want to know more, who are interested in the priorities, who want to delve a bit deeper into what we're doing. And it's really more about the delivery and where our priorities sit. And so this has been supported very much through Emily and Sarah and Quinton. We've had very good comments from partners like John Macmillan and John Nash in our rural estates. So it's been cross-organisational input on that. And then the last part of the strategy is a live action plan. And this is really about supporting how can we deliver the independent, so the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Independent Climate Commission has a very long list of recommendations across a number of different sectors. So this is about saying, what can we do to help deliver on those, but also what do we need to do as an organisation? Now, we accept that that action plan is going to change. As we get more knowledge, as we learn, as we go into projects, we know that some of the actions probably aren't phrased in the right way now. They might need to look a little bit different. And I think that's the really exciting thing about the climate change agenda at the moment, is the pace and scale of learning that we're all going through. So it's been very important to think about, when we develop the strategy, what we need from it. So there'll be, I suppose, 4 key things. One's been about how do we align our actions, our work, our delivery, both internally and externally. So how do we make this ambition more than just the climate change team? How do we make it a cross-organisational endeavour? But also, how do we make it a cross-Cambridgeshire endeavour, accepting that there are some parts of the area which are far more challenging to decarbonise than other areas? And so that first thing about how we align is really important, because we can amplify the impact that we have. The second part of the strategy is about flexibility. So it needs to be enduring, and it also needs to be adaptable and responsive. There's been new policy coming through from government during the last couple of years. So more recently, the net zero strategy, the buildings and heat strategy, but we've also got transport decarbonisation, the Environment Act. These are all coming through. So we need to be able to respond to that and have the opportunity to be flexible if they give us different directions. I think the third premise was about being open to ideas. And I think the thing that we all have to be aware of is that we can't and don't know everything. And so some of the changes that we're going to need to make as an organisation, we don't yet know what they look like, especially when we think about some of our services. So we're going to need to learn from colleagues. We're going to have to learn from councillors and your experiences, partners, residents and businesses who have ideas to help us accelerate the pace and scale. There's a lot of learning already happening in amongst local authorities. And so just in business meetings over the last couple of days, you can already see businesses are putting their mind to this challenge, and it's going to be exciting to see what we can take from them. And then I think the fourth bit is really about better choices. And it was about individuals and businesses make so many decisions about everyday stuff, just about heating our homes, about traveling to work and school, about where we go on holiday, food, clothes. And all of this is making decisions which is impacting potentially on climate change. So what is it we need to do, and how do we support our communities to provide good information to the best knowledge we have, and how do we share that to help others make better decisions? So then I just wanted to quickly go on to say that we also have a lot of supporting documents that support this strategy. So we have an annual carbon footprint, which is published every year. We've had 2 so far, and one's coming forward in January, which just sets where and tracks how we're doing in terms of carbon emission reductions. We're also developing a net zero program and resourcing plan, and that's going to come forward to March. So that's going to really take the strategy and say, what is it we need to do in terms of planning our resources and working with others' resources to be able to help delivery. And I think the third bit, which a lot of councillors might be interested in, is that we're also planning a communications and engagement plan. So this is about saying, this is what we know, we can share with you what we know, how do we share best practice with you in the communities, and how do we work together on certain aspects? For example, if we're going into your communities with think communities, looking at how we're delivering adult social care, how do we also think about adaptation to climate change? And so just finally, I know I've taken up a lot of time, but it is quite an important strategy. I just wanted to give you an example of something which sounds quite simple to do, but then you can see how involved it is with lots of system change. So earlier in the year, our colleagues in adult social care were looking at how to cut carbon emissions through one of their contracts, which was a home taking people from hospital to homes. And so there was going to be significant levels of car use in that. And so the idea was, well, why don't we just specify an electric car for the providers? Now, when the market were consulted on that, and you're having discussions with the market, it was clear that actually the investment, the upfront capital investment in an electric car or a number of electric cars was one thing which was quite challenging. But then the second thing was challenging was that they might not even be able to afford the grid upgrades on the electricity infrastructure. So what seems like a very good and reasonable idea, and it's the right thing to do, you can see that it opens a chain of understanding of what more needs to change in our system. So when you look at that as a problem, you're then saying, well, we then need to look at our procurement activities and how do we need to change contracts? Because if we're only setting out 1-year contracts, that doesn't give the market enough time to get a return on its capital investment. So the reason I wanted to use that as an example is that we can look at lots of little things and make very big changes because they open up just how we need to work through and change so many parts of our different system just to bring in one change in a specification. And so I thought it was helpful to highlight how everything that we're doing has got systems, which is financial systems, procurement systems, it's infrastructure systems, and it's how we also make decisions within that. So I think that's it. Sorry, Lorna. But I look forward to your comments on the strategy.
Thank you, Cheryl. I thought that was an excellent introduction, and I don't begrudge the length of it. It wasn't, I think, over lengthy in terms of just the sheer importance of this piece of work to not only the council but also to the county of Cambridgeshire. So I'm going to throw this open to questions now, and we have Cheryl here to answer questions with us, but also we have Emily again from the climate change team, and Rebecca, who is the policy and strategy manager for business improvement and development. So they will be assisting with questions as well in their respective areas. So I'll throw it open for any questions that members may have. Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a question on Appendix 1, page, I think it's, I've lost my pages now, page 17, where it says the buildings owned and occupied by the council to have fossil fuel heating as part of the net zero by 2030 for the council. Does that include all county council buildings or just county council offices? Does it include schools, for example?
So that includes the county council buildings that we own and occupy. So schools, with maintained schools, well, first of all, let's go on academy schools. They're not part of the county council's carbon footprint. They're the carbon footprint which comes into the area. So that is just targeted at our buildings.
Okay, if I can just come back on that, Chair, it feels slightly disingenuous, because if they're county council buildings, then surely that should be included in the 2030 target, or at least in this report specified that's not the case, so that people don't think that it is, if that makes sense. For example, on Appendix 3, page 7, item 51, it says that they work with schools to support their decarbonisation, including retrofitting to improve energy efficiency, is ongoing. There's no deadline for that. So it just seems a little bit confusing as to what are we saying is a net zero council by 2030, what is included, what isn't included, and what the deadlines around that actually are.
That's a good point. We will clarify that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hathorn.
So this may be covered in the communications and engagement strategy, but obviously I'm not sure what the timeframes are, and that might come to light after this is taken to full council. But it is a communication and an ideas and an engagement sort of series of questions. Residents are encouraged to email members with their testimonies about what they've done to reduce carbon. What then do we do with those testimonies? Are they going to be collected somewhere so we begin to see an overall pattern? There's also an email address where residents are encouraged to discuss with the council what happens. And I think this is completely the right way, but what then happens to those suggestions? Is the data captured? Does that come to committee? Do we see those ideas? Do we, how does this work? And can I have a reassurance that if someone writes a really thoughtful active travel response, that won't then be bounced back to me as an LHI suggestion, which just feels like a brush off. And in terms of the internal organisation of the council.
Hathorn, could I just ask you to say a little bit back from the microphone, please? I don't think you need to be quite so leaned in. Thank you.
And in terms of strengthening the internal ownership within the council, is that strategically going to change? Because at the committees I've attended, I see a stretched, busy council, and there isn't the space to talk about the climate change ideas, which I think are really important and want to, is there a strategy whereby at the point where this is published, we begin to operate differently?
Okay, there's a lot in there, Councillor Hathorn. So if I take the first bit, which is about if residents or community groups tell us about what they're doing, the most important thing is that we are sharing information so that others can learn from that. And so we will be looking to set up, as part of our website, a place where we can put best practice so that others can see it, and also where others can access information. if carbon reductions are created by our community, we do monitor that. So Sarah Wilkinson does the annual carbon footprint report. And what we are looking at are 2 carbon targets. One is the area. And so this is covering domestic emissions, so from heating, from buildings. It's covering all transport, it's covering land use change, waste, etc. Those figures are aggregated, of course, but we understand what emissions we produce every year and we can report on those. So if the community and businesses are making reductions, that will be reflected in those aggregated figures. We won't have them on an individual community level. So let's say Histon or Soham necessarily, unless they've already looked at their carbon footprint. So I think the answer is yes, we will be monitoring those, but it'll be coming through aggregated figures. I think the third bit was about how do we respond to communities? Was that right? The third question?
Well, so I guess it was the email address where we can email in our sort of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Hathorn, this is one of the big challenges we are going to have, is that the community have great ideas. And it's how do we get those ideas shared, and how do we also have the opportunity to look at those ideas without being overwhelmed, as you know, because there are great ideas in the community, but it does take a long time if there's a lot of officers involved in trying to support those. We want to work with think communities who are going out into the community to be able to gather ideas to then help in particular areas, actions to take place that will make a difference to the local area. But we're also hoping that individuals will be wanting to undertake action themselves and just be empowered to do it. Or we can guide them to grants and things like this. I think your point is, how do you affect policy change if you think that it's bigger than just what is a local community issue? Is that right?
I think to an extent, I guess it's, are we keeping track of all the suggestions? So then we can say, this is where policy change should be. Because we're encouraging people to send in the ideas. And so we need to be really respectful of people's time sending in those ideas.
Yes. We probably need to do some more thinking about that, Councillor Hathorn, and we probably need to really think about what that means when we do the community and engagement plan, communications and engagement plan. I'd agree. I don't know if Becca or Emily want to add anything on that.
Yes, Cheryl, I will, if that's okay. I think the short answer, Councillor Hathorn, is yes. Certainly in the corporate policy and strategy team, the monitoring of those patterns that emerge from that feedback is definitely something that we will be wanting to do, to think about this policy and more strategic policy interventions that we need to think about. Basically, we don't actually know what level of input we're going to get from communities, and that might be amplified through the communication strategy. And as Cheryl said, we might need to do some more detailed work on that in early 2022. But just to reassure you, yes, if people are sending us ideas and thoughts, we would be absolutely committed to capturing those, thinking about what they mean and thinking about those patterns that might emerge across Cambridgeshire, because our sense is that communities are already doing lots of really positive things. And as Cheryl's talked about already, this strategy is about our role in that and how we might use our resources to amplify the impact across the place if it's possible to do so. So it's a bit of an experiment as well, but we will definitely take everything that comes in via that route, very seriously and feed it in.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got Councillor Bradnam next, and then Councillor Smith, and then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I welcome this strategy very much, and I think it's a very positive indication of how seriously we take the matter of climate change. What I'm conscious of is that we on this committee and the council as a whole has made great efforts to invest in energy generation projects, and that's excellent. But I'd also like to think about the other side of that equation, which is using less. And so I'm concerned about insulation. So referring to Appendix 2 on page 14, which is page 90 of our agenda, we're talking about the key themes for our strategy and action plan. And at the bottom of that page, it says we're already investing in programs to cut fossil fuels used for heating its existing buildings, as well as designing out fossil fuels from new buildings. Now, what I'd like to see is that we also are taking steps to improve insulation of our existing stock. And if we're already doing that, I'd like to see that more thoroughly mentioned in our strategy. I know we can't make any amendments to this, or perhaps we can't make any amendments to this at the moment, but I would like to see it being taken seriously going forward. And I say this because I was trying to add up how many years ago it was, but something like 30 years, 40 years ago, I was in Denmark, where they were, even in those days, they were thinking about how they could mitigate against climate change. They were putting already, every new build was having triple glazing, and they were putting the highest spec of insulation in their new homes. And certainly other countries in the EU have higher standards for insulation than we do in the UK. So I'd just like to see us having a really significant input into encouraging better standards for insulation and also we need to be thinking about retrofitting practically. You know, we've got a lot of old, you know, we were fortunate in the various world wars, a lot of our stock wasn't so badly bombed as some other countries. And those countries have taken the opportunity to build under these new standards. We've still got a lot of beautiful old historic buildings, but they're extremely difficult to retrofit. So I just wondered if we could help our communities to think more seriously or assist them practically and technically with the serious business of insulating our existing housing stock satisfactorily in a way that will see us needing less energy going forward. Thank you.
So the council back in, my corporate memory here, December 2019, developed a policy which was net zero buildings policy, so for new builds. So we are, with our schools as an example, we have set a high standard for energy efficiency and a high on-site delivery of renewable energy. So the aim is that new builds are highly efficient, but you're also mentioning the retrofits. And so I think you're probably right. We probably need to put in a couple more examples just in this page about what we're doing on retrofits, because we are investing £1 million, or we have invested over the last few years, £1 million in energy efficiency measures just in our buildings. A lot of that's been on lighting, but it's also on other insulation methods. So happy to put in a couple of lines in the strategy to amend that before going to full council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think if I can just interject before I come to Councillor Smith, I think the bigger question is in insulation of domestic properties and how we work with partners to influence that, whether it's new build or retrofitting.
Yes, and so we have actually just quite recently been part of a consortium. It's led by Cambridge City Council, but it's a consortium which covers most of the local authorities in Cambridgeshire. And Emily, just remind me how much we just drew down quite recently. Was it 2.8 million for domestic retrofits through the HUG bid, the Home Upgrade Grant?
Yes, so there's a couple of different funding pots that have all been awarded recently, and we, the Cambridge Energy Retrofit Partnership, which as Cheryl mentioned is ourselves and all of the districts, we've just been awarded just under 6 million to do domestic energy efficiency retrofits in low-income households. And the group, we've also got aspirations to develop projects further to enable a wider set of homeowners to benefit.
Thank you very much, both. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Basically, I know you said that this document, the action plan, will be changing, which is quite understandable, yeah. On page 96, we've got the transport hierarchy. We don't seem to be including all non-motorised users, like horses. I raise this at every opportunity on the Highways Committee. I would not be consistent if I did not raise it here as well. Equestrian world. We need to include all non-motorised users.
Yes, thank you. That is a very good reminder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, with regard to the transport hierarchy, we don't seem to have much in there with regard to creating cycleways in rural areas, because a lot of my residents would like to be able to use their bike or whatever, but it's very difficult when we're on narrow country roads and you've got fast moving traffic, whether it be HGVs, buses or whatever. So they don't feel safe. How are we going to, in the future, create more cycle routes in rural areas to enable those residents to be able to use an alternative form of transport? Because at the moment, in most of the rural areas, particularly mine, there is, if they don't use the car, they've got no other alternative to get to shops, the doctors, the hospital or whatever, because you've got no cycling routes. It's not like living in the city or wherever, you know, you have got to get in your car. We have had, thankfully, the Combined Authority now has set up a bus service for my particular area, whereby you can call the bus. So you have got a much better chance now, but that is still a diesel bus. So I would like to see that change to electric, but we do need to be doing something in rural areas whereby people can use a bike or use some other form of transport to get into villages, to get to the doctors or whatever. Because if you start going down the LHI route that was mentioned earlier, I'm told, well, we can't do that because it is far too expensive to create that section of cycleway from that village to that village. So, you know, we do need to be looking at this as a matter of urgency if we want our residents to be.
I understand. So there's two things here. I had a conversation this week with someone called Stacey Miller and Camilla, and they're pulling together an active transport. I'm not sure if it's travel or transport strategy, but it's certainly focusing on walking and cycling. And I do know that we had a conversation about that connectivity between rural communities. Recently, I went on an electric bike, which I have to say is very exciting. To get from one village to another, I didn't have to break sweat at all. And so in the future, it'd be really interesting to see if we can have good connectivity on cycle rides with, you know, push bikes or electric bikes being able to be used. So that was one thing, is we'll have a look and see what's in the active travel strategy and what could be brought over to here. And then the second thing is there's the refresh of the local transport and communicate, hang on. Yes, the local transport and connectivity plan, isn't it? And so that's coming forward for March next year with the CPCA. I haven't been involved in the detail of that, but I'm sure our colleagues in transport are working on the active travel elements of those. But I can report back on that if you like, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. I think we have Steve Cox as Executive Director. I don't know whether he wanted to come in response to that. I certainly know that this was a significant portion of the agenda of the last Highways and Transport Committee of this authority, which is very firmly on the case on active travel. We spent a lot of time in this room only last week or the week before discussing that very matter, and particularly young people in rural areas. But I'll bring Steve Cox in.
Thank you, Chair. It really is just to stress that was a discussion that we had at Highways and Transport and something that was clearly flagged as a priority that we need to look at. And as Cheryl says, the local transport connectivity plan that will come through in the next few months will be an important policy sort of framework to address that particular need. And also, as we've pointed out in our action plan, there's also an action plan being prepared for the Climate Commission's recommendations that Cheryl and I are working closely with the Combined Authority and many other partners on. and transport is an important theme there as well. So there's a number of angles through which we can address that really important issue about active travel in and between our rural communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. I don't think I'm seeing any more questions, so I'll move this now to the debate section. So the recommendations before us, which I will move formally, are to note the report, to comment on the revised draft climate change and environment strategy, and to recommend it to Council for adoption as corporate policy. So can I see any speakers on that, please? Councillor King and Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chair. So I really support this strategy. I think it's really important, and I support it on the basis that, by and large, most of it is everything that the previous Conservative administration had already put in place, including the £16 million investment that the current administration parties voted against. So I thank you for reminding us of the importance of sticking to the Conservative plan for Cambridgeshire and reminding us who the party of the environment really is. So thank you for that. But I am disappointed, really disappointed, that coming into a new term, there was an opportunity to do more and to add more. There was an opportunity to add more investment to that 16 million and to be more ambitious with the goals and the targets. And unfortunately, I feel that some of the items in this strategy are a bit disingenuous in the way that they're worded and a bit confusing. So, for example, Appendix 1, page 7, the section where it says we commit to ensuring the County Council delivers on its target of net zero emissions. Of course, that includes scope 1 and 2 of a 50% reduction by 2030, which is what we'd already agreed to anyway, and doesn't include scope 3. So I do support this plan, and I just feel that there could have been more. There could have been, it lacks in ambition, and there's an opportunity to do a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Your comments are noted. Councillor Hay.
Well, it seems my colleague has stolen my thunder, because having read this paper, I failed to see what's so very different in this paper to the one brought before committee by the previous Conservative administration. And I also believe that the opposition at that time voted against it.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe it should have come under questions, but I missed my opportunity there. So when we were talking about funding for residents, for example, the Solar Together programme that I believe is going to be rerun is an example, I think, where we can use our procurement powers to very usefully add to the amount of work that's gone on in insulation. So perhaps there's opportunity for cavity wall insulation and loft insulation, for example, as well as that. Those schemes, when they were run previously by the government, had a really quite high uptake, including myself, who took advantage of the cavity wall insulation to some significant benefit. So if we could look at that possibility, I'd be really pleased. And particularly since the Conservative government withdrew their Green Grant scheme after only 6 months, and we lost the 1.5 billion funding for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milnes. I recognise I'm remiss. I think I omitted to ask for the proposal to be seconded. So, Councillor Gay, thank you. Councillor Corney.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's hard to sort of disagree with anything that's in this. I think it's, and I think, regardless of what side of the tables we sit on, I think every one of us here want to see the right thing done, don't we? So I think the only comment I'd add would be that I look forward to sort of seeing how this progresses over the coming years, and hope that, with the many organisations that are all trying to do the same thing, that we don't miss anything, and that we don't duplicate anything, so we can sort of continue to do that right thing. I guess I look forward to seeing some budgets over the next the few years to see where we can where money comes from, and not just from this organisation, but other ones as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corney. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a hugely ambitious, but also very credible plan, which has been the result of lots of hard work, which I've seen from officers, which I completely support. I acknowledge what Councillor King is saying. It's based on a very credible plan from the previous administration, but accelerates that plan and I think accelerates it as fast as you can reasonably go. The 2030 plan is for the council to be net zero is entirely reasonable and ambitious. But the 2040 plan is almost entirely dependent on government policy from a Conservative government who doesn't take the actions or don't take the actions required to decarbonise things like transportation, like housing. So, you know, I think the 2040 plan is a stretch target because it's completely, the 2040 plan is a stretch target because it's almost, lots of the elements of that are completely outside of our control. So I would encourage my Conservative friends to lobby their government to take the action required to accelerate, to allow us to meet this target and perhaps accelerate it further in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Ferguson. I'm not seeing any other speakers. Oh, Councillor Gardner again.
Thank you very much, Chair.
And you hadn't spoken that, Jim.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, following on from those comments, I just find it amazing, really. This document is really a continuation of the Conservative policies stated in 2019, which I fully support and all my colleagues on this side support. And I'm very pleased to see that the joint administration has now decided to follow that same route. Now, we are all in this room, I would sincerely hope, at any rate, looking at ways we can reduce climate change across Cambridgeshire. But we do need to bear in mind that this particular policy, where it states net zero, is only scopes 1 and 2. We are looking at a 50% reduction on scope 3. And I do believe this authority should be honest in that fact and state it quite clearly at the beginning of the document, not partway through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any. Oh, Councillor King again.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to reiterate that point from my colleague just there. I think that this is a really great strategy, a continuation of what we had before. Whilst I am disappointed in the lack of additional ambition and investment that could have been put in, I do just want to reiterate that I think there are some really confusing statements in there that we do, as Councillor Gardner said, just really need to look at making sure we're not misleading the public in terms of what really is 2030, 2045, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any fresh information or fresh points to bring to this debate? No, in that case, I will sum up on the debate because I think this is such an important issue. I did want to say a few words before going to the vote. This is an extremely ambitious new strategy for the council, and I am grateful to all those who have taken part in it, and particularly to those officers, particularly Cheryl and Rebecca and Emily and the team who have worked so hard to bring this together. It is very ambitious because it achieves a number of things. It brings forward the target for Cambridgeshire to achieve net zero from 2050 to 2045. That's a whole 5 years further forward in terms of our target and in line with the joint administration's agreement. It commits to net zero for the council's own operations for 2030. It agrees to set a baseline for biodiversity increase. Now, that was when we inherited the administration of this council back in May. We inherited a target for an increase in biodiversity, but absolutely no baseline from which to measure it. We have secured additional additional spending in our this year to start the process of setting that baseline for biodiversity so that we can measure the improvement and increase in biodiversity. As Cheryl has said, we are operating in conditions of some uncertainty, and she made that very clear in introducing the report. We are now nationally taking much more of an interest in and are increasingly, I think, concerned about the impact of peat. And that's something that wasn't really considered in the detail necessary, or perhaps with the information necessary at the time of the previous iteration of this strategy. So we are very acutely aware of that. And also there's uncertainty at governmental level, not just about overall funding to get us where we need to be to meet net zero, but also specifically in the area of, for example, waste, where we simply do not know at the moment what the government is going to do, where it is going to jump, and how we fit in, and how we therefore ensure that our contribution to decarbonising Cambridgeshire through the way in which we handle the waste stream and hopefully reduce waste as well as handling it as it arises. So there's a lot of uncertainty, uncertainty at governmental level, uncertainty all over the place, natural uncertainty, and we are doing the best we can with that. But we have now a changed scenario since the last strategy. We have the combined authority, we have the report of the Climate Commission, all of which is very, very useful indeed. And we are working together with partners to get us on this journey. And those partners include our communities and businesses. And one of the new elements of this strategy is a very much renewed focus on the role of communities, on the role of businesses in helping us meet the targets for the council and also for Cambridgeshire. Much has been made of references to scopes 1, 2 and 3. Scopes 1 and 2 are much more within our control, but I need to point out that this council's scope 3, the carbon arising from our procurement and from the things we buy, are other people's, other organisations' scopes 1 and 2. And therefore, we need to be working with those businesses and with our commercial and other partners to ensure that their scopes 1 and 2 are reduced so that we can also reduce our scope 3. So that's how that fits in. I hope that makes that a little bit clearer. The other thing that we are aiming to do and working very hard on is spreading the understanding of the importance of decarbonisation and tackling climate change across the whole of our own organisation internally. That is easier for some elements of the council's operation than for others, but it is a very significant internal task to make that leap. Cheryl has described in her introduction of an absolutely classic example of the complexities of that, but areas of the council's operation, such as adult social care, for example, who didn't see themselves as coming into post to save the planet. They thought they were providing care, but they're part of this enterprise. They are part of helping us to save the planet, decarbonise and tackle climate change across Cambridgeshire. So there's a lot of new stuff in here. There's a lot of more ambition in here than we had before. There's the bringing forward of the targets, there's the setting of the baseline, there's the working with partners, both out in the community and also in other tiers and levels of local government, and grappling with some of the uncertainties we face. We know that the action plan will change and develop over time, and that's natural and absolutely right as we learn more. But I'm extremely proud and very privileged to be able to propose this document today for recommendation to full council so that we can have that fuller debate about this really important subject involving all members of this council. So with that, I would like to see those in favour of recommending this report to council. That is unanimous, I think. Thank you very much indeed, members. So our next item is the review of draft revenue and capital business planning proposals. So this is Steve Cox again, who is joining us remotely. So I'd like to ask Steve to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, introduction. These are the business planning proposals for 22-23 from the EGI committee's perspective. You'll see, I think, in paragraph 2.6, one of the overarching themes for business planning is around environment and the climate emergency, which reflects the discussion I think we've just been having. The details that we'd welcome comments or views on are in section 6, paragraph 6.4, where there are recommendations for pressures to be taken into next year. So 3 permanent pressures in there and 3 one-off as well. And each of those is detailed in an appendix where there is quite a bit of information to understand what the issues are in there, what the asks are, and to get views and thoughts on. So I'll leave it there. Colleagues can no doubt help with any questions members will have. I see Quinton has just joined us, as Emma is also online as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Members, are there any questions for Steve or Quinton or any of the other officers who've contributed to this paper? I'm not seeing any questions, so thank you very much. That must have been a doozy of a report then to have made everything so crystal clear. So therefore, I'm going to move to the debate, and the recommendations are to note the progress made to date in developing the business plan, to comment on the budget and savings proposals, the ones that are within the remit of this committee, and I would urge members to restrict themselves to the matters in the report that are the remit of this committee, and also to note the updates to fees and charges. So I'd like to propose that and look to Vice Chair to second. Thank you. So does anybody wish to speak on this? Nobody whatsoever. So in that case, I will move to the vote on this. Can I see those in favour, please? Thank you. Can I see those against? And can I see any abstentions, please? Thank you very much indeed, members. That is very clearly carried. So our next item then is finance monitoring, and we have Sarah Haywood on remote. So can I ask you, Sarah? Sarah's our strategic finance manager, to present the report. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you. I'll just do a brief introduction. On the revenue side, the bottom line is a 31k underspend, so we're basically on target as at the end of October. The thing mainly to bring to committee's attention is that is related to waste. The waste budget was previously forecasting to spend 850k on the odour emissions work. That's the diversion costs relating to the works. And the works aren't going to happen this financial year now, so it's proposed that that amount of funding will go to an earmarked reserve. And then in addition, also, there's an annual reconciliation of a previous year's spend and tonnages, and it was identified that some of the street sweeping waste and some of the trade waste was incorrectly charged to the county council. So that has been adjusted now. And so that means that we'll get a 460k refund relating to last year, and also the forecast for this year is adjusted by 240k. So those two amounts are also suggested to be putting into this earmarked reserve, because then that will reduce the pressure in the business plan for next financial year. So committee is being asked to support the proposal to put a total of £1.55 million in this earmarked reserve. And if it does, it will then go to strategy and resources for formal approval. So that's all I was going to say on revenue. And then on the capital side, the only major change is that the 4.5 million budget given for the capital works for the odour emissions work has been slipped to next financial year for exactly the same reasons, but works won't happen till next year. Thank you. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Are there any questions for Sarah on this report? Councillor Milnes.
Yes, I may be being obtuse, but I'd like to just make sure I have understood this odour treatment works, because obviously at a previous meeting, I think with the highways, but no, it wasn't, was it? It was here. We talked about the responsibility for improving the odour treatment work. And so I just wanted to understand if we were pushing the revenue back, which was while odour treatment works were being carried out when we had to go elsewhere. Is that have I got a correct understanding of what those sums were detailed for?
My understanding is on the revenue side, those are the costs of diversion while the works are taking place. So because the works are slipped to next financial year, the requirement for diversion is also slipped to next financial year. So all the costs relate to next financial year onwards.
Thank you. So that's the way I understood it. So that's a relief. And in terms of the capital expenditure, are we provisioning in case we take the hit on the cost, or is that what we will have to pay anyway?
Again, my understanding is that is the budget if required, but there are discussions, and obviously it will be the minimum. How much the liability falls on us and the actual amount will be to be negotiated. That is the estimate which is going into the business plan, but then we will have to, obviously we want to minimise whatever it is.
Thank you.
I think we're rather straying into commercially sensitive territory here, Councillor Mills. Yeah.
Thank you. But that's confirmed my general understanding. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Are there any further questions on this report? I'm not seeing any, so we'll move to the debate, and the recommendations are to review, note and comment, and to recommend to Strategy and Resources that 1.55 million of waste funding is transferred to an earmarked reserve towards the revenue costs associated with addressing waste odour emissions work, and that's now slipped to the next financial year, 2022-23. So I'm proposing that. Councillor Gay is seconding. Does anybody have any points they wish to make about this before we go to the vote? Councillor Bradnam.
As a general point, I'd just like to say that the residents of Waterbeach, my division, I'm sure will actually welcome this EU directive. I appreciate it may be difficult to manage, but certainly the residents of Waterbeach are currently still constantly subject to odours across the village, which are really unpleasant. So actually the fact that this work is needed is actually very much welcomed by the people, the residents of Waterbeach. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much, Councillor Bradnam. Any other contributions? I'm not seeing anyone indicating, so I'll go to the vote. Can I see those in favour, please? Thank you. And those against? And those abstaining? Thank you very much indeed. So the next item is the committee agenda plan and appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels. So I'm turning now to Democratic Services Officer Dawn Cave to update us on any changes to any of that. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any changes to make. I'm not sure if Cheryl or any of the officers on call have got anything to add. I don't think there is anything though.
No, I don't think so either. I'm not seeing any indication that that's the case. So with that then, are we happy to accept the forward plan? And yeah, excellent. So with that, that seems to conclude the meeting in remarkably short time. So thank you all very much indeed for your attendance and your contributions. Thank you to officers for their explanations, the answers to all those questions and their ongoing support. And as this is the last meeting of this committee of the calendar year and before Christmas, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish everybody a very happy and healthy Christmas and New Year. Thank you all.
And to you.